My name is Lisa Fultz, and I'm the Associate Professor of Soil Microbiology and Cropping Systems with the LSU AgCenter. And my research for the last few years has focused on the use of cover crops and soil conservation practices in Louisiana's agricultural production systems. And one of the questions I want to address today deals with the use of cover crops and why everyone is talking about them and why the interest in using cover crops has grown so much in the past few years. You may be more familiar having heard about green manures, which were used by past civilizations to enhance crop growth. It was around the 1960s, I believe, when they started to rebrand these as cover crops. But again, this is something that's been in use for thousands of years, with recognizing the benefits that can come from having this as part of an agricultural system. Examples that we can find of this that are pretty close to home, but are certainly not the oldest references we've found, is of the Native Americans' use of the Three Sisters, planting corns, bean, and squash as part of a system to help with production as well as the benefits that they provide to the soil. We can also find references in the 1740s to crops that were grown specifically to eat and sell versus those that were grown only to replenish the soil, again recognizing the importance and benefits of these systems. In this case, they were often growing things like clovers, grass, and buckwheat. And in the 1940s and 50s, when we see the growth and use of chemical fertilizers, is when we start to also see a decline in the use of cover crops because producers were able to get their nutrients from alternative sources. However, as prices have been fluctuating and the relationship between nitrogen fertilizers and differences in oil prices, as well as a growing concern for environmental stewardship and sustainability, we have recently started to see a resurgence of the use and interest in utilizing cover crops for their nutrients and other benefits. The prime directive or objective for a cover crop is that this is a crop that is grown specifically for the protection and enrichment of the soil, because you have this physical barrier now grown between the soil and those erosive forces from raindrops and water movement as well as wind erosion. And these can include grasses, legumes, and other forbs that are planted specifically for erosion control. However, it's those additional secondary benefits that we've seen as more and more research is done into cover crops that really are several of the driving factors between or why producers are selecting or deciding to utilize cover crops in their systems. These secondary benefits include improving soil structure, moisture retention, and nutrient content. They do this by having a diverse amount of biomass and root structures that come from the different types of cover crops that you can plant. By the use of legumes, which are plants that form relationships with bacteria in the soil, those bacteria fix nitrogen from the atmosphere. They then trade that nitrogen to the plant for carbon, and this allows for that nitrogen to be brought into the system and then tied up in that biomass for release later to subsequent crops, as well as increasing nutrient cycling and availability by taking up other nutrients that may be left over from applications earlier in the year, or just helping to feed those microbial communities, which then in turn impact nutrient cycling. They can also increase beneficial soil biota, and these biota can help with suppression of diseases, as well as, again, helping with nutrient availability and nutrient cycling and improving soil structure and stability. Some cover crops work very well for weed suppression, and many cover crops will provide habitat for beneficial insects and wildlife. Now, many people may think about this from the other perspective of the possibility of cover crops acting as host for predators or detrimental organisms, but they do also promote those beneficial organisms. So a lot of times it is a trade-off between the two. I've also worked with several producers who have looked at using what we would consider in row crops as cover crop or species as also potential forages for different animals and for grazing. And many of the producers that I've worked with are looking at supplementing that feed that they would bring in during the winter by planting these winter annuals in their systems. We typically group these cover crops into three different classes. We have our grasses, our legumes, and our brassicas. And while many of the benefits may cover all three of these classes, some of them are a little more specific depending on the type of cover crop that you select and the species that you select. For example, grasses have shown a great potential for suppressing weeds. They're able to outcompete many weeds and also shade out several different species. They also are typically very deep rooting, which means that they're able to get a hold of those nutrients, particularly those that are mobile in the soil like nitrogen. They tie up those nutrients in their biomass, and as that biomass degrades, it becomes available for subsequent plants and cash crops, and they assist in nutrient cycling. Legumes, like we talked about, are able to make that relationship with the bacteria in the soil, which then brings in and the ability to fix nitrogen and acting as a nitrogen source for subsequent cash crops. And they also will help with nutrient retention and nutrient cycling. We have research that shows that in particular systems where we've planted only legumes, we actually start to see increases in plant available nutrients like phosphorus in those systems. Brassicas are known for high biomass production. They also help with nutrient cycling, and some have these very large rooting structures that may provide benefits as far as breaking up plow pans and compacted layers. Now, one thing to note is that a lot of these benefits are not something that will be an instantaneous occurrence. You put in the cover crop and you automatically start to see these benefits. Some of these are additive and will take a couple of years before you start to see those benefits. So it is something that you're going to want to commit to for a few years. One thing that I really want to promote is the amount of resources that are available to you out there. Probably one of my first recommendations would be to hit up your local extension agents, NRCS agents, and research faculty. For example, a large number of the faculty at the LSU AgCenter have been doing research on cover crops and the implementation of those into row crop production systems. And we actually have the great fortune, the Louisiana Agriculture Magazine is doing a focus issue on cover crops and the work that we've been doing this fall that should be available hopefully fairly soon. We also have regional cover crop councils. The Midwest one I think has been around for several years, but in the last couple of years, the Northeast region as well as the Southern cover crop region have all started their own councils. I happen to be a part of the Southern Cover Crop Council, and they're putting together a website that has recommendation tools where you can go in and actually select the parish that you live in, and it will give you recommendations and resources for what kind of cover crops are best suited to you, as well as individuals to contact if you have questions. The SARE program also has several resources that are available, and their book that they put out, which is called the Managing Cover Crops Profitably, is a great one that I use pretty much anytime someone asks me at cover crops. I pull in that book out and looking for different resources. There has been discussion that they're going to be updating it, I think going into a new edition. I don't know where they are in that process, but it has been passed around to the different councils to get input from different individuals, as well as the NRCS agent or NRCS resources that are available in a variety of locations. What I've provided here are a list of those resources, the websites that will kind of get you started, as well as the QR codes that will take you to those various websites to hopefully make it a little bit easier. I want to thank you for the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about the basics of cover crops and why they're so popular and what benefits they might bring to your system. Please, if you have any questions, I have a website through the Ag Center. You can also reach out to me via email. I do have a Twitter handle where we try to post updated information from different projects we're working on, the majority of which have to do with cover crops. So if you have any questions, please feel free to let me know. And thank you for your time.